Well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Martyn to the session today for at least two reasons. One is because of his expertise on Europe, and secondly, because one of the biggest issues in Brexit has been to create a barrier between the UK university sector and the European EU university sector, which means that we've had to work much harder uh, to be able to be involved closely with our European university colleagues. And one of the things the ICC-Languages does is actually to preserve that link and make it possible for all of us to continue communicating. And I think one of the, well, no, I won't go there because I think that is political and you don't necessarily want to get involved in that. Um, but anyway, just to quickly introduce Martyn, rather like me, he started off in the BBC as a radio and TV producer, and much later in his career, he was the Berlin correspondent of the BBC. Um, but academically is very, very important. When we met, Martyn was actually the head of the European Parliamentary Office in London, which was a really important link between the EU and between UK, both politically and also commercially, and in other areas as well. And I think that's really, really important. He's also, and maybe something you might want to mention a bit more about, he was director of the Federal Trust, which actually looks at things. So basically, the good news is that Martyn has remained, like me, and I expect like you now, Sam, pro-European, rather than saying, hey, we're an island, forget them. And also he's a senior honorary fellow at Regent's University in London, very, very good university, and patron of the University Association for Contemporary European Studies. So basically, huge experience and importance in making links work between the EU and Europe generally and the UK, especially at the academic level. And that's why I really want to see what's possible in improving the links between UK universities and our European cousins. Okay, Martyn, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. Thank you. I make a small apology for my voice. You'll hear it's a fairly low register. That's partly because I'm recovering from a cold, but I'm fairly sure my recovery will last for the short hour that is our time on the internet right now. I want to talk to you indeed about the UK universities and transnational education, its analysis and its prospects. And within that sits the whole issue of British universities' relations to universities on the continent of Europe. But it also sits within a context which is wider, which is the large number of foreign students who come to British universities. And from a university standpoint, if you were chancellor or vice chancellor of a university now looking at this issue, you would see it as a global concern in which Europe plays a role, not just a European issue with a global hang-on. So I'm going to shift the focus, if you like, towards global university relations in which our European relations play a very major role. So let's get started. I'm speaking to you obviously from London, which is where I am now after a long career that spanned at least 7 universities and taken me around the world, very fortunately. From this very eclectic background as an academic and an international civil servant and a journalist, I want to develop some personal views on transnational education and its growing importance. And I shall quote a lot of figures. You don't have to note them all, but noting the big ones would be quite wise. Perhaps in our discussion afterwards, we can then draw some more reliable conclusions from this analysis, and we can draw those together to see where they're leading us. All conclusions are always open to discussion. TNE, or transnational education, is a topic which has come into focus and been adopted, and it has adopted this slightly misleading name, I think, only recently. So let me start with the definition. According to the organisation that brings together all universities in the UK, called Universities UK, or UK Universities, TNE is the delivery of a degree in one country other than where the awarding provider is based. It goes on to say it can include, but not limited to, branch campuses, distance learning, online provision, joint and dual degree programs, double awards, fly-in faculty, which is a lovely phrase I came across in this research for the talk, fly-in faculty, and any mixture of these. Universities UK is obviously concentrating on universities, doing just what it says on the tin. But there is no reason why this definition shouldn't apply to other levels and other forms of education and training. Many leading British schools, for instance, have established campuses for secondary level teaching abroad. And the International Baccalaureate, which you will all know about, and it is an internationally recognized school leaving certificate. And that's been with us for 50 years or more. And some professions are also moving in the same direction, establishing internationally recognized qualifications in their field. So while we are concentrating in this talk on the tertiary level, especially universities, let's not shut our eyes to the increasingly global phenomenon of education at other stages, both before and after university, and also in other areas of knowledge and skill than universities may currently be concerned with. So the definition's done. Now some caveats, some warnings. The meat of the issue concerns the universities and TNE as I see them. And during our talk, I want to stress 4 key points. First, a word about where the term transnational education has come from. Second, the context in which the UK universities currently approach TNE. Third, the costs and benefits are seen by partners in TNE, people in this country and people in other countries. And fourth, and finally, some of the obstacles or problems which I think may alter or slow down the future development of TNE. The first point I want to stress is its history. Transnational education is new vocabulary, new usage. When I was an undergraduate, nobody used this term. We spoke of TEFL at most, teaching English as a foreign language. But teaching English as a foreign language is a technical term now, seems slightly old-fashioned. It doesn't cover the field. What makes TNE quite different is the much expanded range of what is taught under the umbrella of TNE. What used to be English for scientists, English for medics, English for pilots, English for any activity under the sun, when taught at university level and bundled together, brings you well and truly now into the world of transnational education. What in earlier days was seen as specialist knowledge, or sometimes subject-specific knowledge, has become the broad offering of universities. The whole exercise is relabeled TNE. And English language dominates this international marketplace. Estimates vary. Some suggest, however, that half of what we describe as TNE worldwide is offered through the medium of English. Some suggest, that's both from the UK, from the United States, from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, other English language national countries, as well as an increasing number of continental universities in Europe, which themselves are now offering courses in English. Others argue that it's closer to just a quarter, difficult figures to measure in all this field, with other languages like Spanish, German, French, and Chinese, all now competing with English in this expansion towards global education. So you can see there's a lot at stake in the language that you choose. Let me move now on to my second point, which is the national context of TNE in the UK. The British Council recently sent a questionnaire to all UK universities, asking what they thought they were doing abroad questionnaire. Over half claimed that their teaching and research aimed at, and I quote, global reach. That means that nearly 80 universities in the UK already see themselves or are striving to become global universities. And one important aspect of global reach is the growing importance of TNE. The economic value of TNE originated in UK universities doubled between 2010 and 2020. 10 years, double the value. It grew, and it now comprises £3 billion value in the GDP of the UK, just a very big sum. Seen from the UK, TNE, however, has two faces. One is inwards to the UK, where currently 680,000 students are studying from abroad, and outwards to the rest of the world, where UK universities are now educating another 500,000 students. UK universities often operate abroad in collaboration with local institutions. That makes complete sense. No one would not try and collaborate with local institutions. Often it is other universities. That form of collaboration accounts for just over 40% of the students in that 500,000. But they also operate through distance, flexible and distributed learning, from the Open University units to correspondence courses. That accounts for more than a quarter of the total number of students abroad in the rest of the world. Over 100,000, I beg your pardon, over 100,000 of that 500 are enrolled at universities in a partner country whose staff teach materials supplied by UK partners. And just under 10%, so that's still close to 50,000 students, are enrolled in an overseas campus of a UK university, a physical presence belonging to the UK university. So much for the overall size of TNE abroad. Of that total, 2/3 of the students are undergraduates. 1/3 is engaged in postgraduate study, though mainly through taught courses. Only 1% of that student body is on a research postgraduate course. The largest cohort of all these students studying within TNE framework from the UK's angle are in Asia, over 50% of them, which is the region showing the strongest growth recently. China, followed by India. That's not surprising, billion population countries. Nigeria, however, and the USA are among the 4 largest groups. And over 100,000 students are in Europe, and nearly that number located in the Middle East. Now, this fast-growing outreach to foreign students in their own countries should be seen alongside the growing number of foreign students coming to the UK to study. I quoted the headline figure of 680,000 students, which is a vast, vast number of people studying. Of this number, 1 in 5 has come from Europe. 4 out of 5 come from the rest of the world. Of course, that changed over the Brexit hiccup, if I may put it that way, when nearly 1 in 3 students were coming from Europe and only 2/3 from the rest of the world. The proportion there has changed. But these figures should be read alongside the number of academic staff in UK universities, and they are the number that are not British. Roughly 1 in 3 of all teaching staff come from abroad, and half of these are from Europe. The other half, obviously, then from the rest of the world. Let me take Birmingham example just as a single example of a university for you. It celebrates its 100th anniversary next year, and it is now, of course, in organizational terms, nothing like what it was when it started. Then it was essentially a regional medical college for the Midlands of England. Now it ranks 12th in the national university ratings and 80th in the QS World ratings. It currently teaches nearly 9,000 international students from 150 different countries. And 1 in 3 of its academic staff come from abroad. That fits the national average. It's heavily engaged in teaching foreign students at its campus in Birmingham, but also reaching out abroad to teach Birmingham degrees to students elsewhere in the world. And this is what it looks like. If you look at their website, they have a map of the world, and attached to it are the university identifies 14 points in foreign countries where it claims a physical presence. Clearly, Birmingham takes TNE very seriously. Its outreach includes a China Institute with 3 branches, an Africa hub, with a presence in Nigeria, an Indian presence, outposts in North America, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, and in the Gulf, and importantly, in South America. In Brazil alone, it lists 6 international research projects where affiliated staff from Birmingham are involved, covering subjects in arts and law, social sciences, life and environmental science, medicine and health, as well as engineering and physics. It's like a mini hub university in South America. Birmingham is not exceptional in this. Many UK universities are now operating abroad, stressing collaboration with local universities or institutes of higher education. Many have arrangements where units of a course can be taught abroad and count as credit if and when students later study in Britain. Others use them to pre-select students for a place at university in Britain. The annual flow of students coming to the UK varies year on year, of course. In recent years, it has sometimes been as low as 200,000 and as high as 450,000, but averages around 300,000, roughly speaking, 50,000 here or there. Looking at the source countries for students in the UK, India leads, with China fairly close behind. Others sending around, each sending around 100,000 students, and Nigeria sends another 50,000. Others come in descending numbers from Pakistan, the USA, Bangladesh, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Italy, interestingly, and Saudi Arabia. In a ranking exercise recently among 700 European universities, the UK was by very large measure the highest scoring country. That's very flattering, in fact, for our university sector. And openness to the outside world was one of the criteria most admired and measured in that survey. There is a story that crops up from time to time in different versions in different universities, and I'll make the point because it's light relief from all these figures. At some stage, a professor will recall that he taught a student once who went on to be president of whatever country it was. And then there's some truth in this. At a recent count, 58 current world leaders were educated at British universities, which is quite extraordinary. It isn't quite so extraordinary though when you remember that 65 were educated at American universities, but that wasn't in my speech. I've just added it. Such, however, is the soft power that the UK exercises through its universities and through the English language, right? And also a reflection of the quality of the universities themselves. But this success has bred problems. There is currently some concern about the financial viability of higher education sector in the UK. The cost of delivering higher education to a very large number of British students, now nearly 40% of the age cohort, nearly 40% of school leavers are coming to university, has risen faster than government grants and the fixed fees that they pay can cover. As a result, some universities have overcompensated by admitting foreign students who pay higher fees. That's one of the explanations of the large figures I've been quoting you. Here come the examples. University College London, very famous college for London, for instance, has 28,000 foreign students, making slightly more than half the total number of students in its central London campus. The second largest contingent, some 19,000 students, are at a university you won't have heard of, the BPP University, which concentrates on very practical courses organized in 4 areas: business, technology, nursing, and law. 18,000 students are at Manchester University, 17 at Hertfordshire, 16,000 at Coventry, 13,000 at the University of the Arts in London. All these universities draw more than 40% of their student body from overseas, as does the LSE, Cranfield, Imperial, St Andrews, and the University of East London, all over 40%. That poses a financial problem as far as the universities have grown to depend on foreign fees and would now find it difficult to restrict numbers of foreign students. If domestic demand remains high and universities don't expand more, they're going to be forced to start to make compromises on one group or the other. We're not quite there yet, and they're still recruited separately, and most universities do current internal financing to see there's cross subsidy, if you like, from the foreign to the domestic students. But that is part of a big domestic taxation, student, societal debate at the moment. Should we have fewer or more students going to university within our own universities as they stand at the moment, in fewer universities, in more universities, in other forms of higher education? Part of the British domestic debate. In government statistics, for the moment anyway, foreign students arriving with student visas for a limited number of years and in order to study here rather than seek employment are counted separately from migrants who move to the UK for a variety of other reasons. But in the eyes of the population, of course, and that's the same in every country, and in the popular media in particular in this country, students are seen as migrants just like any other visitor from abroad for a long period. A concern for the wider issue of immigration spills over now into the increasingly polarized debate about foreign students. Turning to my third main point, let's look more closely at the costs and the benefits of TNE. While governments agree these TNE frameworks from north to south, from Britain to outside in the world, it is institutions, in particular universities, that actually engage the process. And it's individuals, that's students and staff, that directly benefit and are involved in it. Increasingly, the uneven relationship between one agency in what we used to call the first world, giving, and the other in the third world, receiving, which are terms no longer used, I use them only in this as illustration here in the lecture, is shifting. It's shifting towards a relationship of mutual dependence. It's the only respectable way of formulating this relationship, although it began quite clearly as outreach gift from the University of London throughout West Africa for many generations, 2-3 generations from the 19th century. But now it's seen as mutual dependence. The two sides of TNE, originator and recipient, are increasingly involved with each other at more levels than simply buying and selling, giving and taking. One recent report justly considered this as a transformative journey for all participants concerned. But it does also fit very neatly for governmental purposes under foreign aid, which is where many of them, not only in Britain, locate the cost and the benefits of transnational education. If you take the government for a start and how they see it, they look at the potential for TNE by British universities in the rest of the world and do an estimate. I gave you the figure for what it brought into GDP. They estimate now that by 2030, it could well be an export-owned opportunity worth over £35 billion per year, a very fast increase. Governments of partner countries, however, may well be equally concerned with the qualitative value of the gains to knowledge and skills that TNE is meant to bring to them. It's meant to bring to their workforce quite generally, and whether the development of the regions where these institutions operate is positively impacted by this input or not. They concentrate more on what they're going to get and the wider societal benefits. From a university point of view, it might seem essentially an educational issue, getting an international balance right between teacher and learner, widening the framework, but coming together on the subject matter for mutual advantage. For a university in a partner country, association with a prestigious university in the UK might well raise their brand value within their home country, might well then attract better students, or more of them, and also better qualified staff. Larger numbers could then help the local university to raise revenue, and for some of them who operate as private universities in these countries, that could be absolutely life-saving. The benefit for recipients of TNE at an individual level is obvious. Anyone, as most of us are involved in university education, see that daily. Students gain access to education not otherwise available to them locally. Both the subject matter and also the method of teaching may widen their life experience. TNE may well increase mobility for students, physically, opening the door to foreign travel and study, socially, by opening the door to a better career. 4 out of 5 students in partner countries, say from the South, that's recipients of this model, claim that added geographic and social mobility is the main motive for studying in this way, with a view to coming to the North. They see TNE as a ladder of opportunity, the main aim to, and when many aim to go on to study at a UK university. So do staff, since TNA brings them new colleagues, albeit at a distance, a new common room, if you like, with whom they are now in contact. Beauty, of course, lies in the eye of the beholder. On a fairly sophisticated economic analysis, the value of foreign students to the British economy, the benefit we draw from it, were they to stay in the country all their lives, but of course many do not, but were they to, would be 10 times the initial education cost that it's cost the British Exchequer or university to educate. A very big gain indeed. But beyond economics and beyond education aspects, TNE also has beneficial results in terms of soft power and developmental progress that reach much, much further. TNE is part of a much bigger global phenomenon. TNE is a catalyst in societal change globally. It is enabled by modern digital technology, that's very obvious, that permits the spread of information, knowledge and skills across the world faster than ever before. And it's a growing phenomenon of global contact. Optimists will claim that increasing TNE will bring more rational and reasonable voices to bear not just on the subject matter that they're taught and learnt, but on ways of thinking and living in a global society. International academia is a global good. And fortunately, it's seen that way at the moment by our governments in this part of the world. I could expand on this by going down the list of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but I won't. They're all there. You can see the impact that a more intense form of tertiary education will have and is already having in parts of what we used to call the third world. But let me skip that bit of the talk and come back more closely to our home ground. What's really novel about this is not that there is a transfer of knowledge. Knowledge has been transferred since man began, but it essentially is the volume of what's happening at the moment and the formality of it going through universities. That's the big new phenomenon. That's what TNE really is. It's more the novelty of this phenomenon than the principle. Universities have existed for well over 500 years in our part of the world. That's the sort of history they have behind them. Let me just go back that far. In 1500, there were about 30 universities in Europe, just about 30. Whether you studied or taught in Bologna, which was the first one, or in Basel, in Salamanca or Siena, Oxford or Olomouc, it didn't matter. Everyone spoke and wrote in Latin. Latin was the lingua franca of the educated elite. It was the language of the universities. It was the language of the Catholic Church. Higher education was then essentially, as it is now in TNE, a monolingual phenomenon across a whole continent. Here, in some ways now, we're witnessing a rerun of history from 500 years ago. The phenomenon is expanded, though, to a global level, and the language is English. There are many more universities, of course. Europe alone has more than 1,000. Other continents, large countries like India and China, sometimes several thousand. Other continents, with very few exceptions, each university teaches in its vernacular language. But when you come to TNE, the dominant language is English. First, we have mass literacy, then mass communication, now digital revolutions. That's what's made contemporary TNE possible and extremely interesting. And it has underpinned the prevalence of the English language, which coincides with this revolution. For the first time, the content of TNE can reach around the globe in an instant and be understood. It can become part of higher education experience of all the countries on earth. Information can come to us wherever we have a mobile phone or a laptop. TNE is reshaping the world by transforming higher education and transforming the profession of being lecturers and professors. This is the latest stage of an accelerating history of almost everything, including the development of universities. When I was a young man, barely 5% of my cohort went to university. Now the figure is over 40. Over the past century, the number of UK universities has grown nearly tenfold, from little more than a dozen to well over 100 today. First generation, and they're all much bigger, I must add, they're all much bigger. First generation graduates form a large and growing sector of society. Students and graduates matter, and politicians take note of their opinions and their interests. The high number of students from abroad attending UK universities has attracted critical attention in the domestic debate about immigration, for instance. Universities have argued back, saying they are increasingly dependent on this teaching, fair enough. Without them, several universities would have great difficulty balancing their accounts and could require more assistance from the state. Trying to reverse this process will obviously be extremely difficult. But my guess is that we're probably reaching something like a bridge, possibly the top of a first hill on a larger plateau, perhaps to come later. I think the right solution in the long run is to have more higher education and to have more foreign students as well. But we aren't at that point, or not, I think, in this country at the moment. There are various suggestions in discussion about in different universities to help match the goal and demands. Perhaps developing dual research programs would be a way of pushing more of our research out from this country into other countries. That's also the case, obviously, with the EU, where we very fortunately have rejoined the European Research Programme, but we haven't rejoined, unfortunately, Erasmus. That is both for teams and individuals. Increasing staff and student exchanges, which can be done on a bilateral basis between universities, is also another major way of improving this. But there's a flip side to the argument, and all to TNE arrangements must not lead to what amount to, and I know this concern is one expressed already in industrial and commercial circles, must not lead to what amounts to commercial or security risk. Now, almost every country, developed country, has a concern about this. Patents exist, patent structures exist, and so forth. But there is already an identified leak of sorts in higher research, spilling in ways, quasi-uncontrollable ways. And that clearly is an area where TNE has raised a problem to which we don't yet have a suitable solution. Let me come to a summary. It's near enough to the end of my time before we come to questions. But everything has gone on a long, long way from simply providing people with English as the means to read and write. TEFL is a thing not of the past, it's a necessary means, but this necessary means has been organized now in transnational education in a very serious way. The summary I suggest is that TNE is here to stay. It's part of a technological revolution. It cannot be stopped or reversed. It's economically interesting for all parties, both the UK and a large number of other states, and at the institutional level for the UK and partner universities. To date, the only serious problems relate to disentangling migration aspect from student visas and the migrant flow in general. And the second one is the problem of sensitive research. The beneficial effects of TNE can be seen and measured in hundreds of thousands by students who benefited already, and by staff as well, and by millions more who will if this process continues. There we are, we have it. English leads as a universal language. That's very fortunate for us, but I'm a linguist, and in some ways I regret that. I would like also to see other languages play a greater role. But the soft power benefits are there for the English-speaking world and through the English-speaking nations to those countries of the north that also enjoy that. Thank you for listening. If there are any questions, I'd be very happy to take them.
Great. Well, that is just amazing. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
We already have a hand up from Burcu Koç. Burcu, excuse me, my pronunciation is, as you probably expect, terrible. But
no. It was,
to ask you a question.
It was correct. Now, I was just actually clapping because it was, as you said, very enlightening, something that I wasn't that well aware. I'm from Turkey, by the way. I'm a language teacher too in Turkey. I didn't have a question, but now that I was given the microphone, maybe I can ask something about the recent developments in the technology. So do you, like the AI, big data, do you think UK universities are ready in this area, in this competitive area? And do you think it's also affecting the attraction of foreign students, international students to come and study in UK?
Well, they're certain, I'm sure they're aware of it. I don't think there'll be any question of not being aware of it. Whether they're, excuse me, whether they're adequately equipped, or all of them are adequately equipped to cope with it, or make use of whatever insights they draw from it, is another question. Our universities are very, very different. And it's fortunate that we have one body representing them, but they split into those that are very traditional universities. There's still very much modern universities, those which are universities highly concentrated on modern subjects, and others not so concentrated on modern subjects. Those that have adopted, dare I say, best practice in teaching, and those that are still adapting to teach, to adopt best practice in teaching. So it's a very, all universities, I think, across pretty well every country are a mixed bag, but we have a particularly mixed bag, I think, in this country, and partly because we have a lot of them. We have well over 100, it's around 140 universities. But as I say, only 80 of them, or thereabouts, have this global concept in their DNA now. And I think they are probably the most adventurous, the most far-sighted, in some ways the best equipped, possibly the ones who will be able to respond most to the sort of challenge that you're saying with the new notions of the digital revolution will bring in the language teaching area. That's a general answer, I'm afraid, but I'm fairly sure in those 80, there'll be plenty that can cope. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Sorry, yes?
There is a message on the, there's a question on the message box.
So it's from Iman. And Iman, would you like to, as Nazan suggested, would you like to ask the question, or would you like me to read it out for you? The answer is yes, and get going.
You might.
Okay, Iman, if you prefer, I'll just read it out. It's a bit of a long one, but I'm afraid, Martyn, it's extremely relevant to your discussions. Here we go. What is the difference between transnational and international education? And this would lead me to the main question. Ready for it? Why international students pay triple amounts of money compared to home students, while the educational logistics remain the same for both groups? Usually, these students are coming from the global south, and they need extra support to reach the UK education standards.
And thanking for this opportunity.
And thank you for the opportunity to raise the question.
Well, let me take it. It seems to me to come in three parts. The first is the title, using the word international or transnational. Transnational is a gesture word. It could perfectly well be called international education. But transnational emphasizes that there are partners on both sides of this. If you read about the subject, you'll see that frequently people are now talking about partner universities. And I think that's right. And I think it's right and proper. Why should a university, let me say, operating in Lagos, for instance, not be on a partner terms with a university operating in Birmingham? And Birmingham academics recognize that. Lagos academics recognize that. Now, it's very true that, as I declared about Britain. There's a whole swathe of different qualities and types of education operated through our 140 or so universities, and there will be in Nigeria as well. But that's not a reason for us to say this is not a partnership. At some levels, it certainly is an equals partnership already. There is an international, worldwide, international academic awareness. Teachers from any country in the world can be teaching, as you can see they do in Britain. A third of our academic staff comes from other countries, and that, I think I'm right in saying, that's something like from 120 different countries in the world. So I think that's the right figure. There is partnership at the level of intellectuals and academics, and that is perfectly fine and proper, and so it should be. I see no reason why that shouldn't be the model held out for international relations between universities globally. And I think that's a useful way to, as it were, push international into the smaller corner and let transnational be in the bigger corner for this dialogue. That's just the first point. But the dialogue, I quite agree, is very distorted when it comes down to finance. In fact, the finance at the personal level for the student, having to find, you're quite right, triple in some cases, and to be fair, it's not in all cases at all. The worst examples are triple fees. I think some of the worst examples are in research postgraduate area, research postgraduate arts area. And that's where 3 times it seems totally unfair that one hour's teaching or whatever it is, guidance from a professor is remunerated not for the professor, but for the university at 3 times the rate of another. That I'm sure that will be ironed out over time, and there's certainly plenty of pressures to do so, because an element of it is scandalous. But the bulk of it is not at 3 times. The bulk of it is at something like 1.5 or little more than 1.5, the volume, the price at which domestic education is offered to the vast mass of undergraduates. So the differential is not so bad, but there is a differential, and that's why the numbers have grown. Numbers of foreign students have grown so quickly, because it's been attractive for the universities to have more to help balance the cost restriction that the government has put on the fees paid for their domestic students. That is in debate. It's likely to go up, I'm fairly sure. There's certainly an active debate on pushing it up from 9,000 to something like £11,500 soon. And that just means that the base rate will be different. The universities will have some breathing space, and they won't need to push higher fees up, or shouldn't push higher fees up for foreign students at anything like that same rate. It doesn't do away with past mistakes or relying in the past on what the market would bear, but it is an unfair market, quite rightly. And the third one, which is you say that students from the global south need more to come up to the level of students here, I think less and less. I know I have a relative of mine, a nephew, who in fact is involved specifically in this area of work in one of our universities, not a leading university at all, and so he's not getting above average students coming to him. And he's saying, yes, there is help needed, but he sees how much help is given and how much is needed, and it's a relatively small input from the university to make them capable of performing the way that domestic students are expected to be performing in the same subjects. So I take it there is some problem there, but I think it's a relatively small one. And if students really find it very difficult, then making use of what many universities are now doing, having a preliminary year with the host university in their own country before they come to the university in the north, is a useful way of bridging that gap.
Well, that is a very extensive and very, very useful response. Thank you so much for that, Martyn. I think if I was going to be a touch cynical about this, I think you did make the point, but rather more delicately. The universities are actually doing extremely well because they are relying on foreign cash to keep them going.
Yes, well, they're doing as well as they're doing because they're relying on foreign cash, but the pressures really are there because of the numbers of underpaid the underpaying of the training or the development of our domestic students. £9,000 is rather a small sum in our own currency domestically to pay for a good course at university. Now, there are good and bad, and people will show up examples that say, my 9,000 was wasted last year or whatever. But I'm sure many go home secretly and say, thank goodness it's only £9,000. It's been stuck there for quite a number of years, and it's not surprising that there's some pressure to raise it.
Well, I'll buy that, and we'll watch and see what influence you have.
Zero.
Okay. Just one point, I think, from me, unless we have other questions on the, I don't see any hands or any other things at the moment in the message. So just a quick one. One of the key things which I felt has been valuable for British universities and the ones I've been working with in London has been the opportunity to collaborate with our European colleagues when going through international organizations, where, for example, one can actually co-produce and co-run, training ideas and thoughts and ways of changing the system, addressing some of the key issues like diversity, etc., which is still a big issue despite what you said. So here's the question. What can we do to get involved with Erasmus at an above regional level and other European organizations in education, which will really improve all our educational exchanges and opportunities?
Well, the Erasmus case is a very special case, isn't it? It's tied to the European Union and the stupidity of Brexit, that we voted ourselves into a corner over Brexit. And reluctance of government, because governments have to stay popular to stay governments, to bend that far. It seems an irrational one, and I think the government's well aware that the arguments for joining Erasmus are very high, are very strong. And I'm fairly sure that will happen. I won't say in the foreseeable future, but within a matter of a few years, that's likely to be settled. But it's been a silly waste ever since Brexit. Universities have been making their own way round it, however, and quite sensibly so. Many universities had, long before Erasmus, exchange schemes with partners on the continent. This frequently grew out of their modern language departments, sometimes grew out of their history departments, their culture, other cultural departments as well. It also included scientists who found specialisms especially in Salamanca or wherever else, that they wanted to be tied to. And so there's a very dense network. If you drew little strings across the map between the 140 odd universities in Britain and the equivalent numbers in different countries in Europe, you would be extremely dense indeed. Yes. Now, that doesn't mean that they were regularly sending students across on a well-organized, well-oiled, well-paid arrangement. The EU made that work much, much better at a regional level, but it's certainly not totally disappeared because Erasmus was stopped. And in many ways, the universities have had to fall back on what they got and try and develop that. That doesn't stop, as I say, pressure that's being put on government to get Erasmus up and running again. And I'm sure they will. Yes, I'm pretty sure they will. It will be part of a bigger package, and that makes it more difficult in negotiation. It'll take a little longer to see that concessions in other fields not related to higher education are made on one side in order for concessions to be given in the field of higher education.
Yes, I would hope for that. And I would see that, for example, in some areas which are seen as absolutely necessary, for example, security, British and European Union officials are still collaborating and have to. And I think possibly through ICC-Languages, you never know, but we need to get that level of collaboration running. And Erasmus would be one of the main channels for achieving that. So
Well, I think you're right. I think it's very good to push on whatever channels we already have and to develop them as far as possible, because if Erasmus takes a little or a long time, that will be less important then, because we've got an alternatives working. Just on the security one, to be sure, if you were referring to Europol, collaboration still works, but the structure of the collaboration has changed so that we are less central to the collaboration now. So we lost on that as well, which is sad.
right. Okay, well, we both agree that the sooner we can build those relations better, the more important it's going to be. Okay, we're on almost 10 to 7.
Yes.
Anybody else, anything else would like to ask? Otherwise, we'll begin to move towards the close down.
Yes.
Yes, who's the yes? Oh, that's you. Okay, good.
That's me. That's me.
Okay, so
Yes.
we'll stop the operation there just for a quick closure, and to thank you again, Martyn, for a really enlightening and fascinating presentation.
My pleasure.
We will be writing it up and publishing a draft, a summary in the next ICC journal, and we will send you that before we publish it.
Thank you.
To make sure we haven't got anything radically wrong.
Fine. Lovely.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Barry.
And what we can maybe do briefly, Nazan, is just to quickly walk through the various things which the ICC has on offer at the moment.
At the moment, on the messages page, I posted some information about our journal, our course Eurolta, and also how you can become membership. These are the information. And I would like to thank, first of all, Martyn, this enlightening session. And as we wrap up this enriching session, I would like to express our gratitude as ICC-Languages for your participation today. Thank you for your support for the ICC. And you can see that our webinar for November is open now for the registration. We would like to see you all there in November. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martyn, again, for this enlightening session. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye then. Thank you.
Bye-bye.